culture has a prescription. You don't have to invent it for yourself. There is a prescription. But it's predicated on the death phobia that the culture comes to dying with. Without that understanding, everything collapses back to the individual. It's up to you. Like, you're free to choose your understanding of what death is. Really? No. There's no way that's the case. Otherwise, you can't account for all the tranquilization at the end, you see. So, always come back to this understanding that death phobia writes a prescription for death, for good death. Say it again. Death phobia is the physician who's writing the prescription and the pharmacist who's dispensing the medication, okay? Yeah. And the prescription it writes for dying well, when it doesn't believe in dying in the first place, would change from if you actually saw it as, oh well, fairly not only predictable, but legitimate outcome of having been born. What if that's the story? Okay, so go back to the first one. So what's the prescription? Well, if dying by definition is something that really shouldn't happen, I mean, we can't do anything, but it really should be otherwise. And when you start to articulate it more carefully, you realize that we don't really think it's dying that engenders so much suffering. It's knowing that you're dying. That's what all the discussions in the stairwell are about whether we should tell Dad that it's terminal. See? Like, Dad doesn't deserve to know at the end of his 77-year-old life that this is where he is in his days, and you call this love or respect. Even like he can't handle it. Well, even if he can't. So, if knowing you're dying is the thing that generates the most suffering, now you know what prescriptions could be written for dying well, don't you? The least you know about it, the better. The least awareness you have of it, the better. You have a chance to die well if you don't know you're dying. Just say that out loud a couple of times. Some part of you goes, wait a second, that can't work. Well, I know it can't work, but that doesn't stop us from writing that prescription. And all the self-help groups and all the cancer care stuff and the whole empire is predicated on the idea that knowing you're dying makes suffering. So until we can limit the dying, we're going to limit the awareness. And they come to the same thing. So how are you going to die and not know you're dying? You're going to be supported beyond your wildest dreams. You're going to be hopeful, realistically hopeful, they call it now. Doesn't change the function of hope. And then ultimately, when all else fails, we got a solution, even for the failure of all the hope and positiveness and all the chemo. And you know what it's called? Anesthesia. Sedation, which is amnesia by another name. There's the prescription. And it's a diagnosis to grave application. There's no hiccup in it as long as you keep it consistent. So the recipe for sanity is written by crazy people. That's what you have. The recipe for good dying is written by people who don't believe in dying. If you wrote a recipe for good dying that did believe in dying, how would it be different? Answer is, more death is better death. I don't mean more symptoms. I mean that the dying is democratized. The awareness of it, literally the information, but more importantly, the deep education in dying becomes democratized. You don't have something called palliative care. In every culture that believes in dying, they don't have palliative care. Palliative care is a ghetto that is concocted by the death phobia. So we're going to hire people who are experts in this to make sure we don't have to be. It's not a recipe for sanity. It's a recipe for specialized anesthesia. So the more lucidity there is around dying, this is the beginnings, okay? But it's an enormously costly enterprise because you have to forego or in some way be willing to reconsider your fundamental convictions about what it means to be happy, to have a sense of well-being. All of those things are up for grabs now. They all have to include dying, not be an antidote to it, you see. So then you rewrite the prescription for dying well that actually expands its scope, not contracts it. Actually makes it, opens it, cracks it open. There's a scene in Grief Walker when the man who's making the film, Tim Wilson, asks me about grief, I think for the first time in it. It's about 2/3 of the way through, and he says, grief, is that what happens to you when you realize, often belatedly, that you're, and I said, that you've been on the take, meaning the nature of life in the dominant culture of North America is so supremely a consuming proposition. And then you awaken to that towards the end of your days. At least the more lucid of us regret that. Let's just say that. And that you didn't awaken to it until now. That's tough, man. And then I tell him that grief is very uncommon in these times because that kind of awakening is so deeply resisted. And then he says to me something like, well, what about people who are just grateful for the fact that the sun has come up and that the flower has bloomed? And I said to him, okay, Tim, as it happens, we were paddling in the late fall on the river. And I said, what season are we in right now? The dying away of the very flower you're talking about. How come every time somebody invokes flowers, they always invoke them in bloom? And while we're at it, what does the blooming stage whisper? Almost finished. That's what a flower in bloom is. Almost finished. Okay? The bloom is the sign of the oncomingness of its death. Why is that the celebrated one? But it is, because it looks the least like death. And if humans were living deeply, our death would look similar. Our blooming and our death would be almost indistinguishable, so close together. That's very doable, provided you don't let the lunatics write the prescription for sanity. But it takes enormous courage, man, to do it at the time, you see. And there's so much else to do, and so many other physical frailties to contend with, and so on. So, why wait? You see, you're not rehearsing for the future tense when you're talking about your death. I mean, you look like you're in pretty good shape, so may it continue, hopefully for myself as well. Does this mean then that we're in the early stages, and therefore we can afford to contemplate what we're talking about? It's an impossible sell. You and I talk about it if we let ourselves as something hypothetical. And although I can't tell you how many people have said to me, well, you know, if I die, I'd like it to be. And then you know, if you're sharp, you lean and say, what was the first word again? And then you point out, they say, well, I meant when. Most people say what they mean. You meant if. You see? So the idea is, since I'm not dying, it's if. And when it becomes when, that means I'm in full imaginal collapse. And I've caved in, and I've been busted by a terminal diagnosis. Now's the time. You're going to contemplate all these things? You joking? No, no, no. Let's put it this way. Spend your health knowing your death. That's what human life could actually look like. And while you're doing that, all around you see you doing it. That's what I mean by village-mindedness. And from that arises the possibility of having a single human example, lived human example, not proposed, lived human example of something otherwise. And now it's not a rumor anymore. And you die like that. And people tell the story. Doesn't mean that they do necessarily understand what they've seen you do. But the fact that your example rankles somehow because it doesn't line up with the old sanity. That's all human beings need by way of a rumor that it could be otherwise. They don't need another plan, another idea. They need a lived human example. And then you realize, what do you think your death is for? It's partly, you're paying down unsuccessfully some of the debt that you accrued by being around. And that's one of the ways you do it. You say, by the way, friends, pretty much, I can't think of anything else to tell you, so I'm going to see if I can die like this. Maybe that'll help. And everybody's death before your own is your chance to get a PhD in the way it is. The more private they become, the more primary schoolish you are. And then you come to your own death as an amateur. I wouldn't wish that on anybody. And yet, most of the people I've worked with were 78-year-old amateurs when it came to dying. And there's no real, it's not in the architecture that you come to your death as an amateur. It doesn't mean that you haven't died yet. That's not a prescription for being deeply inelegant and incapable. There's a lot of things you ain't done yet. But others have. Draw to that. Draw unto that. Be elucidated by that. Be troubled by that too, of course. And somewhere in there awakens in you the possibility that the old spell can be broken simply by choosing otherwise. Not knowing what you're doing. You're not a pro. You're brailing it. You see? That's it. You're brailing. And that's what I tried to do.
When was the earliest death that you experienced in your life?
I'd like to distinguish that from dying. Because you can be dying and then mysteriously not die then. And so you know who I'm talking about now. I was 3.5 first time. And I had spinal meningitis in this late 1950s. So young kids who have spinal meningitis in late 1950s are called dead today. And I was dying myself, and I remember it so vividly. And I learned my death, not because, quote, I knew what was happening. Of course not. But I learned my death because you heavily hospitalized in those days. And all the work, and mostly it's still true, all done by nurses. And the nurses told me, not by instruction, they told me by how they were touching me. And this is the visceral memory I still have. When I was first admitted, and they were still trying to figure out what it was and trying everything, they held me in a certain fashion. You know, I was just a little kid. So they had to kind of bundle you around, you know. And it's remarkable. You get swaddled. Anyway, they were touching me like on their watch, this kid is not going to die. It was very fierce. And I just, you know, I just have so much love for these women who I never met, all dead now, no doubt. But that's what they did. And they kept claiming me over and over again, you know. And whether they had a team meeting, whatever it was, but the touching changed. I don't say that they didn't touch me less. They didn't become aloof and removed. No, they probably touched me just as much. But the quality of the touch changed from he ain't going to die to he is. That's how I learned it. See, hands-on. That's how I learned. So I was really dying there. And it wasn't because of, you know, how I was feeling and the rest. It was because I learned it from how they were with me, you know. And in that sense, it wasn't a mystery. And I kind of knew where I was, you know. And that's the way all of us learn our dying, from how the people around us are. So if we conspire to make you feel good about it, you'll never know where you are. You can't take your inner temperature. It's the least reliable. You know, you need, how is it for me? You know what? Where in the arc of my days am I? And our job is to testify. Not to keep it from you, pretending that that'd be good for you. So that's the first death I believe I learned, is my dying. And needless to say, it has never left me as a kind of gift that all but demented my mother at the time. But fortunately didn't. But in those days, they enforced visiting hours. Even if your kid was dying, they enforced visiting hours. And I will never forget as long as I live that it was the nurse's job to get your mother out of your death room. Can you imagine? Because of the propriety of the, you know, and all that. And they had, those days, they had these pretty heavy doors in all the room, and there was safety glass in the door, about that big. And I can remember that they escorted my mother out, you know, closed the door behind her, you know, and somehow she got them to let her turn around and look at me through that glass. And to be looked at by somebody who loves you as if they're never going to see you again is a powerful thing. And everyone should be able to have that in their lives. That's how you learn it, you see. And that's the gift we have, that we can look at each other like, well, I guess this is it, huh? Now wait for a phone call. It's very precious, you know. Hard, man, needless to say. I never want to look at my kid like that, but someday I'm going to have to. Otherwise, everything I'm sitting here and saying to you now is for naught. So the consequence we have in other people's lives, we don't even suspect. And yet we come to it as a damage control proposition, try to limit the consequence. But the consequence is powerful. It's beyond beneficial, see? It's just of enormous human-scaled consequence. And dying is one of the places where it all shows up. So I used to say to people, you miss your mom? Well, not yet, she's still. Well, what are you waiting for? Well, you know, if they weren't willing to answer, I said, well, you know, probably, you know, the funeral would be pretty tough. I said, the funeral would be real tough if you're trying to do it for the first time then. Well, what do you suggest? I said, all right, I got a suggestion for you. Go in there now and miss her. You mean, wait till she's asleep? No. Go in there and miss her to her. Miss somebody who's laying there in front of you. You don't need them gone. You know you're already doing it. Just do it out loud, man. Well, that'll upset her. I should friggin' hope so. But it'll do more than that. You'll be saying to her, you know, there's no reason for life to continue after you die, just so you know that. I won't even know how. That's a sign that you've been here. The dying people's greatest fear when they were dying, in my experience, was of what was to become of them. Not, you know, where they go in heaven and all that. No, it was, they feared our notorious capacity to get on with our lives eventually. Because it would really raise into question how here those people actually were. See? And our recipe for being okay post-mortem is a prescription for the disappearance of the dead from among you. We call that mental health. Well, don't worry, we've got work to do yet. I ain't finished. When I was active in the death trade, one of the things I came to realize is that the prescription for happiness, sanity, compassion, all the things we've been talking about, honesty, it was all written by a pre-morbid scribe, okay? It was written for a, quote, normal time. It was a prescription for normalcy written in a time where it never was so. It's odd, but I mean, that's what we go with, right? So you have to reconfigure what love looks like. You can't say love is unchangeable and the circumstance will bend to it. It's the reverse. How does a tree in a windstorm not break? Everything but. Okay, so your understanding of loving your parents has to be faithful to the current circumstance. You see, you can't write a prescription for exactly how to do it from what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, loving somebody is fundamentally responsible. That's what it is. It doesn't come with a preordained, fixed understanding. This is loving, this ain't. If you're loving, that's what you'll do, and otherwise you're disrespectful or worse, or self-absorbed, or not a faithful daughter, or whatever it is. So I say, if we use the template of dying, to raise this to its most blistering clarity, you could say, it's not the fact that your father's dying that should change everything, because he's your father. That's the through line. That's why you're there, because he's your father. No, you let dying change everything. You're not loving a father, you're loving a dying father. Does that change anything? And you hope the answer is yes. Just like, you know, I ran a children's palliative care center. A lot of kids died on my watch. And when you try to work with the parents, who are insanely protective, as you can well imagine, they don't even know how to act on the assignment of being a parent when their kid's dying in the hospital bed. And one of the things I had to try to find a way to say to them, they would defend the kid against any ideas I had by saying, well, I know my son. Well, of course you know your son. There's no argument there. And I'm glad you do. And I bend to that. I bow to it completely. But you know your son healthy. All your knowledge of your son come from his health, from the one you had until fairly recently. But I know your son dying. I'm not asking you to give up one in order to have the other. I'm asking you, you got two hands for a reason. Now you got to carry them both. So we don't have to be on different sides of this. But you must learn your son's death now. Otherwise, your parenting stopped at his diagnosis. In other words, this is a articulation of this understanding. It's the dying that has to change everything. That's what being faithful means. Doesn't mean it's always the same. You can't love a schizophrenic son the way you love a normally unhappy son, for example, yeah? And this is where your human repertoire is engaged. It's not a resistance. It's you serve the moment you're delivered to. So your parents are dying. So you're loving dying parents, and your love carries the understanding that they're dying, which means you're going to bring to them things they do not request. You're going to be the daughter or the son of a dying old person. And they have to recognize they're dying in how you are with them. But they won't ask you to do it. And that becomes an act of love, and maybe one of the last ones. As you love them, not because or in spite of the fact they were dying, but you love them dying. And the dying is recognizable in how you inflect that compassion, you see. It's very demanding, no? You have to be quite alert. And I always say, no, go tell them you miss them. Find a language of missing them while they're here. Not for practice. You are missing them now. We both know it. But if you fail in your language, you'll fail to find it. And then you'll stand at the graveside stone cold. Because you're still waiting for the magic moment to descend when everything rolls. You know when that'll be? Never. Because 10 months from now, you'll still be taking sleeping pills. You phone me 10 months later after the funeral and say, I thought it couldn't get any worse. Why is it worse now? Well, you waited too long. Now it's become a kind of like a stillborn something. It had its time. You know, you can't grieve on the installment plan. It's now. And that's a gift, you know. You grieve the person who's laying there. And then you find your repertoire then. And they theirs, of course. Nobody's going to say, thank God you're finally cracking up right in front of me. No. You say, you don't know how to say, I love you, don't die. You know. So you say, I don't want you to die. And I don't know how I'm supposed to be a grown-up person without any parents in the world. I'm supposed to be old enough, but I don't feel old enough. And then you say, do you remember when your parents died? And they say, yeah. And then you say, well, how'd you do it? In other words, what are you doing? You're crediting their experience instead of resisting it. Because you got kids at home or at school off in their 20s. And someday, if you're lucky, they're going to be leaning over you. And you remember all of this moment right now. Then you realize, you're the conduit, man. Now you're the conduit for the whole thing. Your death is the occasion for these things to roll on through the generations. That's what sanity looks like. That's what culture looks like. That's what civility looks like, you know.
Is that orphan wisdom?
Orphan wisdom. Well, it's an orphan wisdom. But orphan wisdom itself is, I chose this as the umbrella understanding of everything I'm about. And I choose the two words deliberately. The first one is, I say to people, orphan. How do you come by orphanhood? And everybody answers right away, quick, no parents. I say, wait, there's no such thing. Never had parents? There's no such thing. I got proof. Shape of your nose. It's all the sign you come from somewhere. No. Orphan is, you got parents, you can't get to them from here. There's no direct, you got a lot of work to do to arrive at. And what about wisdom? Well, I'm not talking about you individually. This culture is famous throughout the world as seeking wisdom everywhere but at home. Famous throughout the world. And the world is making a lot of money off people from this culture trying ayahuasca this week and the Blarney Stone next week. You know what I'm saying? And, African this and so on, Indian that, and all the rest. And that's rooted in a kind of cultural poverty that almost has no bottom, with the conviction that nothing of spiritual merit could possibly come from where we come from, because we're so discredited as being the rapists of the earth and all the rest. And as if hating yourself is fair recompense for what your culture has done to the world. As if it's less narcissistic than having a bombastic sense of your own importance. Same order of narcissism. Right? Yeah. So I say orphan wisdom. I'm daring people who look like me to stop marauding the countryside for solutions to their sense of poverty. Begin the project of cultural redemption with the poverty that we currently employ. And then risk the real possibility that ancestrally there's something so profoundly life-affirming and legitimate. But you got to earn your way there. You can't read the Miss of Avalon and pretend you get it. You can't go to Stonehenge and say, is this what you mean? They can't even do that over there. See? So it's much more elaborate, it's much more courtly, this understanding of where the depth of human life comes from. All the depths of human life are not psychological, man, and they're not individual. They're cultural, they're in history, and that's where we go. History's not an accident. History's where your culture found its legs and then lost them. So I'm in the cultural redemption business.
Do you have a sense of purpose?
You know the answer to that. You can tell already, but please say it. For the sake of the editing, please say it. I say, well, you know. How am I supposed to cut that in? I know, okay. So I don't have a sense of a personal mission, although God knows it probably sounds like it. But it's not an inflection of my character, let's say, or my personality, or no. But I don't view my particular appearance on the scene now as besides the point. You know, I was born into a troubled time, as it turns out. One time a guy making a movie I was in, and he said, could you talk a little bit about your influences? I thought, oh shit, this is such a tired question, but okay, I'm trying again, I'm working on it again. The first thing that came out of my mouth was, I said, well, I was born 9 years after they closed Auschwitz. That's a influence. And he just looked at me like, because they think biographical, you see. But I was born into a time, you see. And my parents were one of the ways that time showed up, but by no means the only or the primary. But it had its way with them, and the same way I'm talking about death phobia. So I was born into a post-war time where people were so willing for that not to be true anymore. Bad old days happen over there. Tribal Europe, uncivilized people. We saved them. We won. TV for everybody. That's the time I was born into. In other words, the amnesia was so thick, and the irony was so soon afterwards. Hiroshima, I mean, did I hear about that? How long did it take? And then it was some kind of history already. You hear this in history class. I was born in the air of that stuff. The ash is still in the air. So in other words, sometimes you have to grow into your influences. They don't actually come to you like that. You have to occupy room in that. So I don't have well, to say it maybe more lucidly, my take on this is there's purposefulness to when you were born. It can take the form of a kind of life calling, if you will, but it is, by its nature, it's so deeply responsive to your times that you have to discern your reason, not from your personhood, but from all the consequences that preceded you and that run alongside you and that may flow from you. Your appearance on the scene is not without reason. And the first half of your life is to find out what that is. And in a culture which considers that to be bombastic or megalomaniacal, I'd say guilty. Fucking right, man. In a time like this, where everybody's trying to cut you off at the knees, you're fucking right, I'm megalomaniacal. Because that's just the only antidote I got to you insisting on living like you're nobody. So, somewhere in that first half of your life, you got to awaken the fact you're born for some reason. And the quality of the times is a big fat hint as to what it might be. That's your repertoire to draw from, to begin to discern, not invent, discern. And somewhere along there, whether you are successful in finding it and living it and getting paid to do it, I'm talking about myself now, no matter how successful or not you were, but that project gives way to the project of the second half of your days, which is, no matter what that assignment is, the second half of your life is to live that in the presence of others, not as an interior reality, not as a lone crusade, not as the heroic arc, but who you gonna do it with, man? Because that's the place where it's planted. Otherwise, it remains a seed you keep bragging about. You keep saying, look at the forest I got. Son, even symbolically, that's not a forest. Okay, never mind. And you want your great-great-grandchildren to be able to eat the fruit of the tree that you never planted? Calling that your identity? That's what I mean by who you going to do it with. And that's where your life starts to turn into an influence in somebody else's life, you see. You don't do this by example. You do it by pursuit, by a lot of that. So I think that's a helpful antidote to the idea of personal motivation. It's not that it's not in there, it's just not a big part of the story. Or you could say, if you got a sense of personal motivation, it has to serve the time you're born to. And how easy it is for anybody who looks like me in this corner of the world to disown this whole crazy thing. And say, dude, you want to find me? Look in Ecuador, in the mountains. I got it worked out. I understand. And they'll be really happy to see you over there too, by the way. You in full flight, completely unsuccessfully deking everything you thought you left behind. The first thing you unpack from your bag is the craziest shit in the world. And then you show all the natives, look at my crazy shit here. Is it okay if I'm here? You don't mind. And so on. You got a local shaman who could help me out? Oh yeah, we got 19 of them. They're all my relatives. They're lining up to take your money. For example, maybe that's true. Oh, of course it happens all the time. So the recipe of figuring out who you are, what you're born to do, and why here is rooted in here. It's a really inconvenient little detail, but I figure you're given to your time. And then you're obligated to proceed as if you are. And you risk a lot of attack. Who the hell you think you are? I'm working on it, I'll get back to you. It's not an accusation to try to be somebody.
So for somebody that's watching this, because my hope is that, that I catch those people that are kind of on the periphery right now, that they see that something's wrong. They've said something just doesn't feel right in whatever way that they do. And maybe they'll hear that one little gem. I heard little gems when I was younger that just stuck with me to put it in a different direction.
Mm-hmm.
So for somebody that's just kind of getting a sense that things are a little odd here, what would you do? What would you say to that person who's coming to you and saying, what do I need to do?
I say, wrong question, friend. What do you need to do is not the question. You got you got a coaxial cable of needs, right? I got news. Here's the first piece of news. Most of it ain't going to get met in this life. So you can squeeze the earth. You can squeeze human relationship. For all your worth, you ain't going to get your needs met. Oh, a few in a transient sort of fashion. And then you get all bitter and all the rest. I don't prescribe need as, all that. They'll always be there. But this arrangement not here for them. But if you're asking me how you might begin to proceed, needy or not, as if you're needed, oh yeah, I'm your guy. You got to proceed as if you're needed. And I got evidence. You got evidence that I'm needed? Hell yeah. You ready? Mm-hmm. You ain't dead yet. You ain't dead yet. Work to do. Looks like you. There's a hole in the psyche of this culture. You know what shape it is? Pretty much that one right there. Take your place, man. If you don't, more work for the rest of us. Take your place. Get busy. So that's it. It's to outgrow the what I need mantra. Not outgrow, man. That's not right. Just give it its proper place. You could say, you've come to this whole understanding of being alive as a question of how you can recompense your needy self. Let's do this. Your needy self is unconquerable, right? Right. Okay. Well, let's give it something to do. It's good with that. Let's give it something. Let's send it to the hardware store with a shopping list that is nothing but bread. It'll keep busy there for years trying to find that bread and haranguing the clerk because they're only selling screwdrivers. And while that's going on, we're going to proceed as if we're needed. We're not pretending that other person's not there, but we're just throwing them off the scent for a while. By the time they come back, futile and empty-handed, you say, that was a rough one, wasn't it? Come on in. In other words, you don't disown the fact that you wish things were otherwise. You wish you were happier. You wish you didn't have that scar on your cheek from when you fell off the bike. You wish your wife loved you or understood you for once. Whatever it is. And you proceed as if a wife who doesn't seem to understand you seems to be one of the principal ingredients in you finding a way of showing up for work in this world now, because things aren't working out quite like you had in mind. There's no magic in it. Or if you could say, it's not hidden. These things are mysterious because they're tangible, not because they're hidden. I mean, imagine a whole culture living according to the following story. There's such a thing as a creator. Okay, good. Or creators, if you want. And the creators, let's say, they got it in their mind to make humans. Okay, I like this story so far. And let's say they make humans from dirt and spit, so not a big carbon footprint. Okay, good. I like it even more. And here's what they're going to do. They're going to make humans with an appetite for the truth, let's just call it, and a way of proceeding. So, okay, great. And then, really brilliant God idea, let's make sure there isn't any. And then just watch them scramble around trying to find something that ain't there. It should be laugh a minute. I mean, a whole week's full of reality TV would be so great. Well, a lot of people in our current regime live that, as if that's the story. So I have a little antidote to that, called everything I've been saying to you. Yeah. By the way, the people who come to me mainly the way you ask, they're not my age. Oh, there's a lot of people who come to what we're doing my age. Most of them are bitter. And they have handfuls of bitterness. They're asking me to pry their hands open and steal it from them. What do you want me to do with your bitterness, man? Like I don't have my own. No. You want to be okay. You're 58 and it hasn't happened yet. You want your payday. I understand. You're too old for that. Too old for what? Didn't you realize that your job description changed? Yeah, you're still bitter and you still didn't get it. But now, you got to be the one you kept looking for. Because there's other people looking. The math just never happens in a culture that doesn't believe in getting old, you see. So I'm writing a prescription for elderhood that doesn't include you being okay first. You got to show up for duty, whether you got what you wanted or not. It's a good beginning. That's what the younger people are looking to, people who look like you and me, I believe, for, whether they ask for it or not. But you got to proceed like you got some idea of what they have in mind, even though they're one hand full of righteous indignation and fury about what was done to the world while you and I were, quote, fully in charge. And their other hand is full of abject despair that it's always been this way, it'll never be otherwise. And that's the world that's been bequeathed to them. I get it. And the first thing you got to do is you sit there in that toxic fury and you say, I see that too. Not, I didn't do it. No, no, no. You see the full thing. See the full thing. You're not wrong, son. But you being right the way you are is going to kill you. And then you begin eldering, which is mostly testifying, mostly being willing to see it, and occasionally being the alternative that you wish yourself somebody had been bestowed upon you when you were 25. That's not beyond the possibility. If we live long enough, that's our job now. You in?
It's in the last 5 years, this project has been me getting out into the world, trying to connect and trying to be a part of something that's moving it. So it's always great for me to meet somebody who embodies that and is embodying it. So yeah, I appreciate you allowing me to speak with you.
Well, I must have known that's what you were on about, which is probably why I ended up sitting here. So, make a deal. I'll continue, if you will.
I can't not. I'm going to.
Oh, yes, you cannot.
Oh, I will.
Otherwise, it makes it inevitable and no achievement. In a time like this, it's an achievement to keep that in view.
Oh, it's always in view for me. I can't not go for that view. That's
Okay, okay. If you say so.
You seem skeptical.
I'm not skeptical. I know you can lose it. I know you can lose it. The only way to honor what you're doing is to say it's not inevitable, you'll keep doing it.
You're right.
I know, man. I mean, how else can we hold on but to believe that we can't do otherwise? But then you'll never glimpse the fact, of course you can do otherwise, and you did. And you may still. Okay, you can lose it, even at your enhanced age or mine. Of course lose it. Of course forget. So when you don't, you got to, once in a while, you got to say, look at me remembering. Go figure. Who knows how long this is going to last. But right now, truly. And then we sit like this and one of us remembers. You know, and then we say, okay, make your deal. Because likelihood of us crossing paths again about that big. So where did I learn how to proceed as if this is it? It doesn't get any better than this. You know where. I was at all those deathbeds. And I kept making an appointment for next Tuesday for the other part, the other half, the other unspoken thing. Eventually, next Tuesday never come. They're dead. And that happens about 3 times, and you say, never again. Everything's now. So, it doesn't make you desperate, but give you a sense of urgency that's pretty much unconquerable. You know. So I recognize somebody with a similar affliction.
Thank you.
We done? Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome.